Okay. Thomas, I'm going to hide your video if that's okay.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just setting up my screen capture right now.
Okay. Okay. So everybody's good. Let's see. Ronnie, you're good. Angelique, you're good. Andy's good.
A cop stopped me and I had my lab coat on my.
Okay. Journalists, does anyone have any questions about the recording or anything right now before we get started? Okay. All right. Let's see. So we are going to start with
Is that an in-person interview or what kind of?
Okay. Kale, I'm going to let you get started.
Good morning. Thank you for being on Zoom with us to discuss this morning what we think is a very important public health issue, cancer-causing ethylene oxide, or as it's often called, ETO. ETO has been released by Sterigenics and BARD into the air as part of their business operations for decades. And those releases have affected hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals living, working, and attending school at least two of our Atlanta area communities, Smyrna and parts of Atlanta, as well as Covington. Though the COVID-19 pandemic has affected virtually every aspect of life and has been an obvious focus of public health concerns in the last 6 months, it is not the only health danger in our community. ETO remains a dangerous health concern, and we want the lawsuits that the attorneys on this call have filed to help return the dangers of ETO and the actions of Sterigenics and BARD back into the public dialogue where we believe they need to be. My name is Cale Conley. I'm with the law firm of Conley, Griggs, Parton in Atlanta, and I'm going to be one of the attorneys taking a leading role in the cases against Sterigenics. My office and my home are located in the areas affected by the Sterigenics plant, as well as many of my friends, neighbors, and community members. Darren Penn of Penn Law, who's also in our building, is going to be taking a lead role in regard to the cases against BARD in Covington. Other lawyers that will be involved include Milton Eisenberg of Dan Chapman and Associates, who will be involved with both Sterigenics and BARD cases. Rob Hammers of Snyder Hammers in Atlanta will be working on the Sterigenics cases, as will Sharon Zenz of Zenz Law and Drew Ashby of the Ashby firm, all three of who will be integral parts of bringing cases against Sterigenics. And last but not least, a person who's been a leader in Covington, Michael Joffrey of MG Law, who will be working with Darren and others on the BARD cases. I want to highlight a couple of things, and my job really at the beginning is to give an overview of the lawsuits that have been filed to date. I believe the count right now is 6 personal injury cases that have been filed in the last 10 days against either Sterigenics or BARD. I want to begin by saying these are not class action lawsuits. These are cases that have been brought by the lawyers who are just identified for individuals, men and women in their individual capacities who meet certain criteria. They have lived or attended school in close proximity to either Sterigenics or BARD. They have also lived or went to school in that area for a prolonged length of time, years. And each of these persons have been diagnosed with either lymphoma, leukemia, or breast cancer. And all of them were in otherwise good health and without significant genetic or other health conditions other than exposure to ETO prior to their cancer diagnoses. All of the lawyers on this call have other clients. These that you're going to hear more about in a little bit are simply the first cases to be filed. We expect over the coming weeks and months, there will be many others. In all the filed cases to date, we are seeking monetary damages for those individuals that have been affected, their medical bills, their expenses, and perhaps most significantly, the physical and mental pain, anxiety, and suffering they have suffered from and continue to suffer from that has greatly affected their ability to fully enjoy life as they did before their exposure to ETO and their diagnoses. The claims asserted in the case against the defendants sound in negligence, nuisance, engagement in an ultra-hazardous activity, aiding and abetting, and there is a claim for punitive damages. You'll hear more about the individual plaintiffs in a moment, but the defendants in the cases are, in the Sterigenics cases, which my firm and others are handling, including Sharon, Drew, and Rob. They are the same in all the cases, though. One is Sterigenics US LLC, which is the operator of the plant in Smyrna. Sotera Health, the parent company of Sterigenics, is also a defendant. Prologis First US Properties LP is the owner of the property where Sterigenics leases the property for operations. They are a defendant. 3 individuals who are high-level managers at the Sterigenics plant and who are believed to have been involved in key decision-making and key activities are also named defendants. You'll also see John Doe's 1 through 10 are identified on the cover of the complaint. And what that is, for those not familiar, is a legal mechanism whereby a party may sue entities under the name of John Doe, and if during the course of discovery, additional names or the names of entities or corporations are identified that were not known at the time of the initial filing, they can be more readily and easily substituted into the lawsuit. In the barred cases, Darren will talk more about those in a moment, but the defendants in those cases are Becton Dickinson and Company, which is the parent company or the owner of Bard. CR Bard Inc., which is a subsidiary now of Becton Dickinson and is the operator of the plant in Covington. 9120 Wheat Street LLC is a defendant in the Bard cases as the owner of a warehouse facility in Covington, which stores ETO and medical supplies that have been treated with ETO by Bard. Boone Brothers is a defendant in the Bard cases. They're an environmental health, safety, and sustainability manager for Bard. 5 individuals, managers or others involved with Bard or its plant activities have been named in the Bard cases, as well as John Doe defendants for the same reasons articulated above. Aside from seeking a monetary recovery in each case for our individual clients, we also hope to utilize the discovery process, the mechanism allowed by the Georgia court system to glean and obtain information, to get documents and take testimony that will at last provide the courts and the public the whole truth about what has really been going on at Sterigenics and Bard for over a decade. What we know is that ETO is a known carcinogen. It causes cancer, and it is released as a byproduct of sterilization of medical equipment into the air as Bard and Sterigenics do on a daily basis. Modeling data and testing data, which is still evolving, supports that there are unreasonably dangerous levels of ETO in the air around the plants that's being circulated by wind and natural environmental conditions onto the playgrounds of our schools, our parking lots of our businesses, and the backyards of our homes. ETO also presents a risk of explosion and fire and danger to neighboring business owners and properties, an issue that will also be addressed and discussed and explored in the course of these cases. That is an overview of the cases, a quick background on Sterigenics, and then I'm going to hand this over to my colleagues. First is really, though now known as Sterigenics, the company that has been sterilizing medical equipment has really unknown to virtually everyone, been operating at 2971 Olympic Industrial Boulevard off of South Atlanta Road and Plant Atkinson Road for decades in the involvement of sterilization using ETO. Historical data, which will be the subject of further discovery in these lawsuits, suggests that significant and dangerous amounts of ETO have been utilized at the Sterigenics plant for years. In July of 2019, we thank Georgia Health News and WebMD and their workers and reporters for breaking the story to the public, to us, to our clients regarding the EPA air modeling data dating back to 2014, which was not publicly known or readily available, but was known or should have been known to Sterigenics, the company that was making the admissions. After that news story revealed the concerning data about ETO in and around the community surrounding Sterigenics, the Georgia EPD entered into a consent order with Sterigenics requiring upgrades to improve the manner and method in which they were handling emissions of ETO. That consent order has been challenged, case in which I am counsel, and is pending before the courts now because of an alleged failure to follow EPD rules on public hearings prior to the entry of a consent order. Following the entry of that consent order, the city of Smyrna and the city of Atlanta were prepared to do air testing of the Sterigenics facility in September of 2019. Shortly before that air testing could commence, Sterigenics voluntarily ceased its operations and continued to be ceased in operations for a number of months, during which time Cobb County officials became aware of issues and discrepancies with the certificate of occupancy and certain permits that Sterigenics had and began to investigate the same. Ultimately, earlier this year, Sterigenics sued Cobb County and individuals at Cobb County in federal court to get a restraining order to reopen. At this time, that restraining order, temporary in nature, has been granted, and Sterigenics today is operating. They're sterilizing equipment, which, while there may be a need, could be done in a way or in a location that does not emit a cancer-causing substance into the air that we and our children breathe. That's a background on Sterigenics. I'll talk more about our clients in a minute, but now I want to hand the podium over to my colleague and good friend, Darren Penn.
Thank you, Cale, and thank you all for being here. I think I'm off mute, just want to make sure. I too want to echo Cale's comments as far as thanking Brenda Goodman and Andy Miller for their colleagues for the outstanding work that they have done in bringing a lot of this incredibly important information forward to the public and raising the general awareness about ethylene oxide throughout the state of Georgia. I also would like to thank Governor Kemp, Attorney General Chris Carr, and the Georgia EPD for their efforts with both Sterigenics as well as Bard and Covington in trying to get these companies to comply and increase their efforts in ensuring that unsafe levels of ethylene oxide are not released into the communities in Covington and Smyrna. There has been a lot of work done, and there's a lot of work that remains to be done. And as Cale alluded to, we anticipate that a tremendous amount of information will be learned during discovery in these cases. And it is our intention to get that information out to the public to further educate these communities and the public as a whole as it relates to ethylene oxide and what levels are unsafe and what are the unfortunate consequences of being exposed to ethylene oxide over a number of years. Now, Cale introduced lawyers at the beginning, and I want to go over again the lawyers and law firms that will be working on the Bard cases. Although I live within 2 miles of Sterigenics and the facility there in Smyrna, I will be taking a lead role with the Bard cases in Covington. I'm originally from Athens, Georgia. So both places, actually the entire state of Georgia is near and dear to my heart. And I have a very significant personal interest in trying to see that justice is done in all of these cases. Also from my firm, we have actually 10 staff members made up of 5 lawyers, 5 paralegals that will be working on these cases. In particular, Mr. Bill Ballard, one of my mentors, will be working day in and day out with me on these cases. Attorney Tommy Craig and his son Banks Craig, they are Covington lawyers. Tommy was the city attorney for a number of years. They will also be working on these cases, as well as, you've already heard the name, Milton Eisenberg, who has a role in both the Sterigenics as well as the Bard cases. And then, of course, Michael Joffroy, who is a resident of Covington, and can fill you in on more about what he sees on a daily basis living in the area. And he has been a tremendous resource for both the community and all of our efforts up to this point. We look very much forward to working with everyone on this legal team, all of the lawyers that you've been introduced to this morning. It is truly going to be a joint effort in seeing that justice is done at the end of the day. Now, I want to talk to you about a couple of the cases that have been filed to date. We have filed 2. We anticipate filing another case perhaps today, and then many more to follow. Both cases have been filed in Gwinnett State Court. The reason for filing in Gwinnett State Court in the Bard cases is the Bard, their registered agent, and some of the other corporate defendants that are involved in those cases their registered agents are in Gwinnett County. And a defendant in our system has the right to be sued in the county of where their registered agent is or where their residence is. And so that's why those cases are pending in Gwinnett County. The first one I want to tell you a little bit about is Ms. Gina Mcclendon. She is a longtime resident of Covington. She's 68 years old. She is a mother. She's married. And she has worked in the assisted living industry for a number of years, in the medical industry for a number of years throughout her career. She is actually the president of, or the director of, the Maryvale Assisted Living Facility in Covington. That facility is about 3 miles from the Bard plant. She's worked there from 1996 to 2019, so about 19 years, actually longer than that. And then before that, she spent from 88 to 96, so another 8 years working at the Newton Piedmont Hospital, which is about 0.7 miles from the Bard plant. So for the last several years, well over 25 years, she has worked in close proximity to the Bard facility. In May of 2019, Ms. Mcclendon was diagnosed with smoldering myeloma, which is a precursor to multiple myeloma. And then a couple of months later in July, in fact, that diagnosis was confirmed that she has multiple myeloma. She does not have any genetic predisposition within her family, and is currently undergoing a tremendous amount of chemotherapy as well as radiation therapy, and she's had surgery as well, bone marrow transplant, and is fighting every single day to do the very best that she can do to survive and hopefully possibly maybe go back to work one day. We'll see what happens with that. The second case that we have filed is on behalf of Dr. Lisa Miller. She is a longtime award-winning pediatrician in the Covington area. She also has had an office literally within a mile of the Bard facility. in addition to living in her home, is 3.5 miles from the facility. She's lived at her home for the last 15 years. Her office, which is basically across the street, about a mile away, has been in existence for the past 11 years. And for the 7 years before that, she, as with Ms. Mcclendon, also worked at Newton Piedmont Hospital, which again is within a mile of the facility. So she has spent an incredible amount of time in close proximity to the Bard facility. And her diagnosis as of July of 2020 is breast cancer. And it's the type of breast cancer that's infiltrating and metastatic ductal cancer. She, her plan, or the medical plan for her for the next several months, is going to be chemotherapy, radiation therapy, as well as a double mastectomy surgery. And so she is in the heart and the throes of her treatment, and is an incredibly strong woman. She's 58 years old, and is going to do everything in her power to defeat this, and to come back stronger than ever. I want to talk to you a little bit about BARD and its history in the Covington area. The facility was first built and opened up in 1967, 68 timeframe. They began using ethylene oxide at that facility right away. They have continued to use ethylene oxide at that facility right up until today. They're using it as we speak, and they're releasing emissions into the atmosphere. What BARD knew, or should have known, and what is just to kind of give you an overview of what some of the medical knowledge about ETO has been over the years, is as follows. In 1981, there was a toxicology conference in Galveston, Texas, where ETO was pointed out as being one of the most dangerous chemicals that is being dealt with in the medical community and in the manufacturing community at that time. And that was the chemical that everybody was going to need to focus on. 1985, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services issued a report indicating ETO was carcinogenic. In 1987, in 1989, in 1991, and in 2007, excuse me, this BARD facility was releasing in the neighborhood of, in 87, it was 76,000 pounds released into the atmosphere in the Covington area. In 1989, it had increased to 101,000 pounds. In 91 and following years, they did reduce some of their emissions. But what we know and what has been reported by the company itself is that from 2004 to 2018, they used over 5 million pounds of ethylene oxide at that one facility. One of the things, just to touch on another aspect of ethylene oxide, is it has a half-life of over 200 days. And what that means is it's going to take over 200 days for ethylene oxide to completely dissipate once it's released into the atmosphere. And some studies have concluded that with our air currents, that ethylene oxide can literally travel around the world 2 to 3 times before it's ever dissipated. So 1990, there was a toxicology profile for ETO that was published, and it's quite a thick document, clearly labeled ETO as a cancer risk. 1994, the World Health Organization labeled ethylene oxide as a group 1 carcinogen. In 2000, the National Institutes of Health labeled it as a human carcinogen. 2007, the ethylene oxide product stewardship guidance manual was released, again identifying ethylene oxide as a cancer risk. And then in 2015, actually, I think my number's wrong here. It's 2019. One of the things I want to talk about, but before I get to that, in 2016, the EPA declares ethylene oxide a level 1 carcinogen. And that's really where kind of which brings us up to today and some of the evidence that has been released to the public about ethylene oxide and about how dangerous this substance is. In 2018, the EPA National Air Toxics Assessment was released, and essentially that's a map where they measure levels of chemicals, all different types of chemicals that are released in various areas throughout the United States. And in 2018, they identified 12 areas within the United States that have increased levels of ethylene oxide and therefore are an increased risk of causing cancer to the residents in those communities. As you might imagine, Smyrna and Covington are definitely on that list. And for Covington specifically, the level of risk for those in the community is twice as high as what the EPA sets as its standard for a level of dangerousness for a chemical. Now, in 2019, I want to talk to you about a couple of different neighborhoods in particular. We have, as we speak today, we have about 120 clients. There will be many, many lawsuits filed on behalf of all of those clients going forward. As Cale already alluded to, these are not class action lawsuits. These will be individual lawsuits brought on behalf of the individuals. But a couple of communities, of neighborhoods within the Covington area that have been dramatically and drastically affected by this ethylene oxide release into the atmosphere there are the Settlers Grove neighborhood and the Covington Mill neighborhood. Both neighborhoods are very poor neighborhoods, and they are predominantly made up of African Americans. The Settlers Grove neighborhood is literally across the street from the Bard facility. And it's down the street from a secret warehouse that was discovered throughout all of this process. Covington Mill is on the other side and essentially across the street from the Bard facility on the other side of the facility. The city of Covington, for the first time ever, conducted independent air testing in those communities, in 2019. It's the first time it had been done in well over 50 years. And to my knowledge, as I'm speaking to you today, I'm not aware of any other independent testing that has been conducted as it relates to emissions of ethylene oxide by Bard in Covington. And what those tests reveal is that in the Settlers Grove neighborhood, for example, the amount of ethylene oxide that was measured was literally 205 times what is allowable under the Georgia EPD as well as the Environmental Protection Agency. And then the Covington Mill area was worse. It was 322 times what the allowable limits were.
Okay.
And so for these particular neighborhoods, the level of risk is astronomical and it's off the charts. And going back to the National Air Toxic Assessment,
Hey, let me hop off.
what was released by the EPA, it indicated that for that area, the measurements came back as 97 times what it should have been and they were using the zip code of 30014, which is the Covington uh, zip code there. However, what's interesting about that is it's a pretty huge area. It's a big landmass. It's about 70,000 miles of landmass. And so if you narrow this in to within, like where the Settlers Grove and the Covington Mill neighborhoods are, within 2 miles or 1 mile, the level of this toxin in the air is astronomical. And what has been done to these communities is devastating indeed. I'm not going to go through all the history of what the Georgia EPD has done. I'm sure many of you already have that history. In July and October of 2019, where they filed a lawsuit against BARD and sought an injunction, which ultimately led to a couple of consent orders. And it ultimately led to BARD admitting that it was not using the best available technology, and in fact spent $8 million to correct and enhance its technology over that time. As we speak today, ethylene oxide is still being released in the community at Covington. We still do not have what we believe are the absolute accurate levels of the amount of ETO that has been released. But what we do know is that Covington is a cancer cluster, and it is statistically significant within this state and within the United States. And something needs to be done about it. And hopefully through these lawsuits, that is in fact what we will do. That's really what I wanted to cover with the BARD cases. And I know Mr. Joffroy will fill in any gaps that I've left in talking about his cases. Again, I appreciate you being there, and I'm going to pass the microphone.
Rob Hammers, you're on.
Thanks to everyone for being here. Kale and Darren have covered a lot of ground, so I'm not going to spend too much time rehashing points, but I just want to say that this whole incidence of cancers that have shown up in the Smyrna and the Covington areas it goes back 40 years, just like Darren said. I mean, starting in 1977, occupational health agencies and world epidemiology studies were beginning to uncover the carcinogenic nature of ETO. So both BARD and Sterigenics, being in business of Sterigenics, sterilizing medical products for over the past few decades, should know that the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, or NIOSH, started in 1977 saying that ETO is likely carcinogenic. And then we heard about the 1981 studies, the 1985, on down the line to where we get to 2016 and the EPA finishes their 10-year cancer track study. And that 10-year study was released in 2016, but it wasn't brought with a fervor or press release or some kind of regulatory response. These companies are allowed to emit ETO by self-regulating, by self-reporting how much they're using and keeping it under the amount that's set by their permits that the EPA suggests is a safe level of use. But whenever they do have a leak or whatever, they have to report it. And we've been uncovering more and more incidences of these leaks. What we call it is fugitive emissions, where during the sterilization process, more gas is getting out than what's being scrubbed through the silos after they sterilize these medical products. And so what we know came out in 2019. Darren, Kale, myself, Drew, Sharon, Michael Joffroy, all of us were just as unaware of the risk of ETO in these communities where we live and work until the Georgia Health News broke and WebMD carried the story and brought it to the public's light. And looking back, you say, well, what did, Sterigenics and BARD knew? Well, they knew exactly about how much it was and what they were doing and how irresponsible they were about the industrial hygienic nature of using this correctly. And when we look at it, all of the studies and all of the available knowledge, they should have either had a better system in place so that they weren't getting this amount of excess emissions happening, or they should have moved their plants elsewhere. Because what we know from 40 years of medical studies is that this is one of the most carcinogenic chemicals on the planet, and it's 30 times more likely to cause certain types of cancer, particularly myelomas, blood cancers, lymphomas, and breast cancer. It's also been associated with birth defects in children, and it's been associated with even more rare cases of brain cancer, prostate cancer, of the likes. And so what we know after the EPA study is what was already pretty well established from the medical community. But now that we have the NATA, the National Air Toxic Assessment, that says here it is in our state, it's incumbent upon us to do something about it. And I'm looking so forward to working with Darren Penn's law firm and Kel Conley's law firm and the two lawyers who I'm working with directly on these cases, Drew Ashby and Sharon Zins, because we're going to get answers to a lot of questions, and we're going to try to protect all these folks that are harmed, because we know from occupational studies and we know from epidemiology studies that this increased risk of cancer is unacceptable. And it's up to us as trial lawyers to do what we can to get justice for those that are harmed, but also to try to change the behavior of the corporations and ensure that no one else is in the future. I know that there's a lot more little scientific data numbers, but Darren covered so much, and so did Cale. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to let Michael Joffroy tell a little bit more about his community in Covington and some of his clients. And I thank you all for being here, and we look forward to working on these cases over the next however long it takes.
Thank you, Rob. I'm Michael Joffroy. I'm not an environmental lawyer or a mass tort lawyer. I'm just a local attorney out here in Covington. And I live about a mile from the Bard plant. And that's where my kids play every day and where my neighborhood is. And I didn't really land this case or these cases as much as they really landed on me. And we are filing today to stand up, and all of Newton County is standing up against this kind of pollution, against this poisoning of where we live. And we're going to fight for these clients, for these cancer victims, for these families that have just been decimated by multiple myeloma and leukemia and breast cancer and all of these other just vicious, awful diseases. And we're going to fight against this giant corporation. You know, $67 billion is how big Becton Dickinson is, and they're based out of Germany. And, you know, I don't think they know what they're doing to the people in Covington and the pain that they're causing and the loss of life and the quality of life and how much they're hurting all our families. But there are a lot of people out here that are hurting. And we know that this is, you know, not an easy battle. And I talk to people around town all the time. And there are a lot of folks who are scared. And there are a lot of folks who don't really know what's going to happen or when they're going to feel safe again or feel like that this is air that they can trust and that they'll feel good about their kids going to school here, their parents retiring here. So it's affected us deeply. And to think that there are these corporate executives halfway across the world making these decisions, you know, I just don't think they understand how tough the folks in Newton County are, and that we are not the kind that are just going to sit around and take this. And, you know, it's like that. It's like that bobcat out in the woods here that you see. It's not the biggest animal out there, but it's going to keep scratching and clawing and fighting to survive, because that's what this is really about, is survival. And they're killing us. They are killing our community. They're putting the poison in the air, this ethylene oxide, and you heard all the other attorneys talk about it so well, and Cale and Darren and Rob, they know the science, you know, the medicine and what's happened to this. And I'm so thankful to have attorneys like this on our team that bring this expertise, because, you know, the regular working folks in Newton County, we need it. You know, we need someone to stand up against this giant corporation, this worldwide conglomerate. So, you know, this ETO that they're putting in the air, you heard them talk about it. It's a known cause of cancer. You know, the recommended exposure for humans is really 0. you know, but yet you had this big group, you had this huge company out here for 50 years, you know, playing the part of good neighbor and really filling our air with this and not saying anything to anyone. So, you know, they never talked about the dangers. They never came to the community or the hospital that was a mile away or the police station that was down the street or the courthouse or the schools. They never talked about it in our community, you know, and more than just bringing it to us, they have a horrible record at Bard of careless leaks, of fugitive emissions that you heard about, you know, a secret warehouse, a place that was never licensed, that was never registered with the state or anywhere else, where all these toxic chemicals are coming out and all this pollution's originating. So, you know, we know what we're doing here today is really just the beginning. We're filing these cases today, but we're going to work as long as we have to. And we're going to do everything we can to get justice for the folks in Newton County, but also, like Cale talked about, all the folks up in Smyrna and Atlanta too, because we know that they're hurting. We are here to work for justice for our clients, you know, these cancer victims, but we're also here for the whole community who wants and deserves to have clean air and a place that they can raise their kids and have their families and not have to worry on a day-to-day basis if somebody's getting cancer. I appreciate everybody on our team, and we are not going to give up this fight. I'm going to turn it over now to a wonderful attorney, Sharon Zenz, who is very talented, and another one that I am extremely excited is a part of this team. Thank you.
You're
Sharon,
muted,
you need to
Sharon.
unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Michael, for your words and for passing the microphone to me. Like many of the lawyers in this group, these cases are personal to me. I live just a few miles from the Sterigenics plant and I'm a member of the Smyrna community. I have a young daughter who plays outside in our backyard that I worry about what she's being exposed to. And when I saw the news, like everyone else, about what was happening, I knew that I wanted to be a part of these cases to protect my community. I've spent my career representing individuals who've developed cancer from various toxins and various carcinogens, and I knew that I had to be a part of protecting the people that I live with. I want to tell you a little bit about a particular case, one of the first cases that was filed. I'm honored, along with Rob and Drew, to represent Stephen Douglas. His case was filed just a few weeks ago in Cobb County, and Mr. Douglas has lived between 2 and 5 miles from the Sterigenics facility since 2010. In August of 2018, he was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma at only 34 years of age. Thankfully, after treatment, he's doing okay right now, but he has a big pile of medical bills and lives in fear of a recurrence of his cancer. Like myself, Mr. Douglas has a very young daughter, and he thinks about the future for his family all the time. And we believe that his cancer was caused by this ethylene oxide emissions from Sterigenics. We intend to hold them responsible. Now I'd like to introduce my co-counsel, another very talented lawyer I'm excited to be working with, Drew Ashby.
Thank you, Sharon. My name is Drew Ashby. I'm a resident of the Smyrna community. As with Sharon and Cale and Darren, we all live down the street from this plant. And we have the honor of bringing these actions that we're bringing at a time that I think is very interesting. September is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. And the science will show in these cases that young, fragile lungs are much more susceptible to the chemicals and the carcinogenic nature of ethylene oxide. And so we are representing Roxanne and Adam Gill, who became parents on March 2nd, 2017, when their daughter Olivia was born. That same month, they moved to the Rosemont Vinings Ridge apartment complex, which is about 3 miles from the Sterigenics facility in Smyrna. Unbeknownst to them, Olivia's newborn lungs were breathing in ethylene oxide. Olivia began experiencing serious medical issues early on, and she was ultimately diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia in May of 2019, shortly after her 2nd birthday. She has had genetic testing, and that genetic testing has ruled out a genetic cause for her leukemia. During this time, Roxanne and Adam became parents again and had their daughter Rosalind on February 6, 2019. And early on, Rosalind also began suffering from a lot of different issues. She has since been diagnosed with a heart defect, other physical defects, and adrenal abnormality and developmental delays. Roxanne, on behalf of their children, want to hold Sterigenics accountable for the harm that ethylene oxide, ETO, which was emitted from their facility into their lungs, caused their 2 young children, and it will forever alter their lives. Rob Hammers, Sharon Zenz, and I, along with Kale and the rest of the people on this call, stand arm in arm, not just with Roxanne and Adam and Olivia and Rosalind, but all of our clients. We're going to do that for them. We're going to hold this facility and this company accountable no matter what it takes and no matter how long it takes. Thank you all so much for being here this morning. I'd like to turn it back over to Kale, who's going to close us out.
I'd like to conclude by thanking you for your patience, members of the media. I know we've run over today, but I think the reason is because you could feel and sense that this is more than legal cases. It's bigger than a lawsuit or a recovery. It's about the individuals. But at the end of the day, it's about public safety. And in the midst of a pandemic, when people may say, why are you going after this? Don't we have to worry about COVID-19? Remember, the safest place to be in the middle of this pandemic is outdoors. And the people in these communities find themselves going from one bad scenario to another. So when someone says, why now? Or someone from Sterigenics or Bard says, we need to do this work, we ask the question, isn't now the perfect time to shine a light on this and put a stop to it through the court system and through the adversarial system and the ascertainment of the truth of what has occurred. Thanks, everybody, and I'll be available later for interviews about my individual cases, which I will not cover now out of the interest of time.
Thank you, Kale. Thank you, everyone. This is Mitch Leff. So the video will be in the Dropbox link that I sent you as soon as it downloads, which probably be about 15, 20 minutes or so. And if you would like to schedule a one-on-one interview with any of the attorneys, we're working those through my colleague, Kim Spees. She's at kim@leffassociates.com. And if you have any other questions, please let us know. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.